Hello and welcome to part two of my Normandy house decoration build, whatever you want to call it. As you remember, in the first episode we looked at the insides and I did a basic paint job and some papering and flooring and skirting boards. Well, this week I'm going to turn my attention to the outside, which is why I've started gathering all these pastel type colours together, because I want to be able to use these in a variety of Normandy battles, say St Miraglise, Caratan, that kind of thing. And I've been having a look at some pictures. Now I don't know how well some of these are going to show up on the camera, but the thing that I'm finding more than anything is it's largely sandstone type colours, and the beauty of having so many buildings to do at once is I can actually tie them together as a neighbourhood. Yeah, whereas before I might treat them individually, and then when you pour them down, they don't sit well together. So just doing this little bit of research in advance and looking at the colours of the mortar and any rendering, beige, sandstony colours seems to be predominant. I mean, there are a few light greys and a few red brick buildings, but the theme is that. So that's basically what I'm going to use as my guide for this, really. So anyway, as before, because I have got so many buildings, I'm not just going to feature one. What I'll do is I'll do different stages and different techniques, and then either feature them in the little bit that I'm doing, or some photographs to show you where I've got to on the others. There's only one building that's stands out as being completely different, and that is this old one from my Holland setups. So I will be treating that as a different colour. So what I'm going to do now is clear my desk a little bit, move some of the ones that I'm not working on to give myself more painting space, and then we'll crack on and I'll bring you back. Right, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to focus on these two buildings, because the thing that these have in common is they've all got the bricks that look more like stone. So that with these ones, obviously, I'm going to be going for a variety of sandstone type colours. So what I want to do first is put a base, slightly heavy dry brush over all of these bricks, and I'm just using some cheap burnt umber brown acrylic. You want a fairly stiff brush for this. I'm not too worried if I go over things, because I can pick them out later, but obviously, I'll avoid them where I can. Whether you can see that, it's not much of a change. It's good that some of the black's still showing through. It'll all add to the depth of it. Actually, I don't know why I'm holding two together. I could do these separately, can't I? It'd be easier to hold. As I say, I'm not going to worry too much if I get a bit on the door, but I am trying to avoid it a bit. But I'll be picking out all these individual colours later. pretty much it, really. Right. So what I'll do is I'm going to crack on and do the rest of this in the same way, and then I'll bring you back when I get to the next stage. So what I've done now is I finished off those with just the brick walls, and now I've brought in some of the others where there's brickwork showing, and basically I've dry brushed the brown over the brick areas, just like the all brick buildings, and down here as well, down the edging strips on this one. But the same with these little ones. I've just picked out the brick area that's showing through, because these ones have obviously got a rendering on them. So I need to do something different for the render. And what I'm going to do is, I've got some of these tester pots from Wilco's before it closed down. Well, I got them last year actually. This one's a magnolia. I'm going to put a little bit of this in, and what I've decided to do, because I want it to have a bit of a surface, I've got some just fine sand here that I picked up when I last went to Scarborough, and I'm just going to mix a bit of that in with it. I might tone it down with a bit of dark brown, I don't know yet, and I'm going to use that as the render to paint on around those brick areas. And it's just these three buildings. The others, it'll be a different process. But anyway, let's get this mixed up. I want to make sure, because obviously I'm going to be changing the colour, that I've got enough to do all of them, all of the three, because I don't want to find out suddenly got a different tone. So I'm going to put a big dollop of this magnolia in just to start. I'm going to be putting it on smoothly. I don't want it to be too, thick. But at the same time, I want it to be, to have that bit of a gritty surface. Now what I'm doing here is when I can get my glue open, is I'm going to put a little bit of PVA in here, because obviously I am putting the sand in. And take the lid off for now. So I need something that's going to bond that as well. There we go. So I just put like a, I don't know, teaspoon, teaspoon of PVA. And now let's pour in a little bit of the sand. The sand, I did bake it to make sure there was no nasties in there. So I'm just going to put a bit in at a time just to see whether I've got the right. And as I say, I think I'm going to... Actually, I think what I might add is a little bit of ochre. Let's just see what that comes out like. I've got a stick somewhere. Not too bad, but I think I'm going to add a little bit more sand. Make sure I'm stirring it in. I don't want to find any that's a different consistency as I'm going along. Whether you can see that. You can just start to see the sand in it. It's very subtle, but I don't want it to be, you know, too overkill really. I mean, I can apply, you know, once it's dried and everything, I can, you know, do some dry brushing to bring it to the exact colourage that I want. But I need it to be basically right. You can see it quite well on the stick, look. Looks pretty good. Right. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush on this one because, you know, I don't want to go over any areas that I don't want render on. As I say, I'm not bothered that it, I mean, you can see on here, look, that, you know, it's not covering over this black, you know, well on this initial coat. But the thing is, it is putting the render down on it. And by keeping it thin, although it lets that black show through, I get a nice coat on it that's not too overkill. And as I say, then I can just paint dry brush over this. It's definitely a case of less is more really on this bit, I think. Make sure I don't get it on the bricks. There you go. Oh, well, you can pick out the grit on that. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover all the render areas on these 3 buildings, and then I'll bring you back and show you what it's looking like. Right, so I've done the textured render, and that's still drying off really, but I can handle it with care and start on the brickwork. And what I've done is I've just put a small blob of various different variations of beige and red and yellow and things like that are going to work as my, tones on individual bricks, so it looks, like it's got a variety of different shades of the same colour. Obviously it's going to look a bit weird when I first apply it. It'll look very in your face, but I'll be going over that with a tan colour dry brush once they've all dried, and that will bring that back down, and then it will look more like, what I'm trying to achieve. So anyway, basically you just got to be fairly random with this. I've switched over to one of my army painter brushes for this, and just pick out some of the individual bricks. Not all of them. Obviously you want some that are just going to be getting their first coat of tan, but like that. And obviously to save on brush washing, I'm doing as many as I want with this one colour before moving on to the next one. And in fact what I might even do is do it across all of the buildings before I switch to the next colour. I mean, I'm trying to be fairly accurate about this, but, you don't need to stress, because, a lot's going to happen to it after this. You're going to give it the overbrush, maybe even another. Then, down the line, you're going to be looking at a wash, and then the weathering itself. So, you don't need to be too worried if you make the odd fleck here and there in the wrong place. But try and be as accurate as you can. I think that's the secret of it. So that's that one. Go. What I'll do is I'm going to, obviously, because I'm going through all these buildings, that's going to take some time. So what I'll do is I'll bring you back when I've got perhaps 2-3 colours down, and I can show you how it's coming along. Right, as you can see, I've been very busily picking out in different shades of beige and red and yellow, all in the same spectrum really. And I've done this on all of the buildings. Those that are not completely brick, obviously have still, picked out the points that are showing through. I know it looks very weird at the minute, it always does at this stage. And I'm not going to pretend that it ain't, it's a long job, but if you want it to turn out the way you're looking for, it's worth putting in that extra effort. And I think you're probably laying out a little bit more on some of these 3D printed bits of terrain. So if ever I was going to put an effort in, it seemed logical to take my time with these ones. as I say, these are all going to be Normandy based. There is the Holland one. I've not actually touched that one yet. I'll be doing that one probably a little bit later. But I wanted to keep these all at the same stage. I've literally just added the last colours. So now I've got to wait for them all to dry. And when they're dry, we'll look at putting a colour over the top that brings it all together. You know, like a dry brush of some tan, probably. Either tan or tan earth, one or the other. Something like that anyway. And then obviously we'll be doing various dry brushes to bring them up to the colour that I'm looking for. Right, I'll bring you back when we're ready to do the next coat. Just before I look at the coat on the other ones, I've decided to give the Holland building a fairly heavy brush of this tan colour. That can work as mortar when I go over with a dry brick colour, and at least it brings this one along as well then, you know, so I've not left it out completely. It's a fairly quick process, this one. I'm not saying I've got it into every bit. I don't mind if some of the black shows through, because that'll help with the when I come to the weathering stage. So you can see what that's looking like now. Right, I'll get the rest of this building done, wait till it's all dry, and then I'll bring you back for the coat over the multicoloured houses. Right, so as you can see, I've given the Dutch building a bit of a coat now before I apply the brick pattern to it. But now I can turn my attention back to the psychedelic wall, and this is where I'm going to bring it all together. Now what I'm using this time for this is tan earth. I think it's 70.874. It's by Vallejo. And then what I'm doing is just brushing it over like this. You can see how that's brought that down, and you can just see different tones. I mean, it may take more than one dry brush, but initially I'm happy with that because there's still a little way to go yet. So I'm going to go ahead now and overpaint with a dry brush all of the these coloured walls. As I say, it doesn't matter if you get it over the windows and stuff, because we're going to be picking those out with different colours later. You can see what it's starting to look like now. Right, so that's that one now. We can let that dry. And I'll move on to the others. Right, what I'll do is I'll crack on, get all of these up to the same level, and when they're dry I'll bring you back for the next stage. So now that the bricks and all the little bricks showing through the render have been overbrushed, I'm now starting an overbrush of the render itself. And obviously I'm trying to avoid the bricks. But the good thing is that obviously when it's wet, if I just, I'll just do this bit here. Right. If you have a look at that, can you see how I've caught some of the bricks? Well, if I just gently rub that, doesn't get it all off, but it leaves like a dusty trace around it. You see? And it just looks like the powdery residue that's left behind when the renders fell off. So it actually looks quite effective. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, do it deliberate, but you're going to catch the edges on things like this. But where you do, just gently rub it, and then it will look like the dusty residue of it underneath where it's fell off. So I'm doing all of the ones that have got this on. Like I said before, the main thing is, you know, mixing enough, you know, so that you don't have any glaring colour changes, you know, where you've suddenly switched it or you haven't got the tone quite right. And all I'm using on this one, really, I put a couple of dots of model paint into it, but it's essentially one of these tester pots. I used to pick them up for 50p. Just look for lightly colours. I mean, I've got all kinds of greys and greens and beiges, and usually I can find a use for some of them at least. And at that price, they're a lot cheaper than model paints. Right, on to the next one. Anyway, I'll carry on with these and then I'll bring you back when I'm at the next stage. So this seemed like a good time now to start blocking out the details of the build with, you know, like the doors and the drain pipes and all the shutters. You know, all the smaller parts really. So we're basically getting all the colours down there. I mean, we're going to come back and touch some of these up, but it's important at this stage to start getting those colours down, and then I can move on to getting the Dutch house caught up. Very much like the Normandy builds, this Dutch building, it's going to be a brick finish, but I can still use the same technique and just pick out a few bricks in a different colour before I do the overpaint. So I'm just picking out those individual ones, and what I've done is I've done a selection of colours. They're all, I think, tones that bricks can come in, obviously not as bright as that, but once it's been overpainted there won't be that bright and it'll just be different tones of terracotta. So that's what I'm going to be doing now. I'm going to be picking out them and picking out these, and then I'll be doing all the final touches like the window frames and the doors and stuff on all the buildings. But I'll bring you back when I get to that stage. I'll pick a few of these out and then I'll bring it back and just show you what they look like before I overpaint it. Right, so as you can see, I've picked out a variety of terracotta type colours. As I said, I'm going to give it an overbrush with this cheap Crafter's Choice. I'm not quite sure what colour that is, but it looks brickish. So that's the one I'm going to go with, because I'm trying to use them up because I've had them for years. And I've done it to all the floors and obviously the roof bit that's got a bit of bricking on it as well. So the next thing I'm going to be looking at is all the roofs, because obviously, as you can tell, I've done nothing with them as yet. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to brush on a very dark with a hint of blue grey slate, and then I'll look at, you know, touching it up afterwards. But initially I want to get the block colour down, so that's what I'm going to be mixing up next. Right, I'll bring you back in a bit. So while I'm waiting for the roofs to dry, as I said before, I mixed up a bit of my blue-grey and used that on the roofs. I'll bring them back and show you them later when they've dried, and then we can have a look at dressing the roof up a little bit, you know, to bring it down from its overall colour. But I thought what I'd do now is just do the overbrush of the bricks, and you can see what it ends up looking like. You don't want it on too thick, but you want it thick enough to cover. There's a bit more than a dry brush, obviously, but not very much more, because you want some of that beige to show through to suggest mortar. There you go. You can see that. And the colours, you know, although they're almost disappeared, you can still see them, and it just gives that hint of a variety of brick styles, colours, and it just gives it a bit of something, you know, because if you have it just all one uniform colour, somehow it doesn't seem to work. It just looks too bright, too, you know, too in your face. But this gives it a bit more of a realistic look. I mean, I'll let it dry before seeing if it needs another coat. But like I say, I want some of that more to show through. Right, I'll crack on and get the rest of this done, and I'll bring you back for the next stage. Right, so I've been focusing on bringing the Dutch house up to a similar level. I've just been doing the windows and picking the windows out, and this grey platform that it stands on. But what I've also done, that one's going to take a little while to dry now, is that earlier I did some of the terracotta spotting out on its roof. And I've been umming and ahhing really what colour to go with on this, because it just seems so stark, it all being reds, but it does look like, you know, that was the overwhelming colour that these roofs are. There were some that I found that were brown, but I thought it might look a little bit jarring. So I've decided to just opt with mixing up a slightly redder orange terracotta look using some cheap craft paint. So I'm going to now start the overbrushing. Let's see how this works out. It's starting to come together. Let's put a bit of light on it for you. It might have been useful, I think, to have put on a layer of this colour before doing the spotting, because obviously black is such a dark colour to come up from with such a light colour. But I don't know, it might give it a hint of shadow as well. So I'm going to see how it dries. I'll carry on with this, and then I'll bring you back when it's dried, and we'll see whether another layer works or whether it'll be fine without. I mean, we're going to still apply washes and things yet, so it could work out okay. Right, I'll bring you back in a minute. Alright, so I've got them all up to the same stage now. Everything's painted out. I've started doing some dry brushing of a light grey to the roofs, just to give them a bit more of a realistic texture. And I'm not going to move on to the real weathering or the internal decorations and rubble and whatever. That's for the third episode. But what I am going to do is I'm going to apply some soft tone quick shade wash in places on these. And then before I go on to the next episode, the final thing that I'll be doing to these this week is giving them a light touch of the matte anti-shine varnish. Now, I don't always normally do that till the very end after I've weathered it and everything. But the reason why I'm doing it is I'm going to use some of this for the first time. It's called Flory Grime Weathering Wash. They obviously do a series of washes, but I've not actually used them before. But I believe they're it says on it that they're a water-based clay wash. Now, the reason when you're applying this, I mean, obviously it's going to be next week, to get the effects you want from this, it's about watering down and wiping off what you don't want and then what it leaves behind. So that's the reason why I'm going to finish this week with giving these a quick blast of anti-shine varnish, just to protect where they are now. So when I'm rubbing at this stuff next week, I don't interfere with any of the paintwork or effects underneath. Anyway, I'm going to sponge some of this on, and once I've done that, I'll bring you back and we'll close this one down, and we'll see what, talk about what's going to happen next week. Right, back in a second. Right, so I've added the wash now. As you can see, the buildings that were rendered are looking a lot more realistic now. They're not so bright and in your face. They were looking very, very newly painted. And we've took that down now just by adding that. Obviously the weathering stage is still to come. But this at least gets that under texture and colour of it in place. So it's, you know, it's starting to look the part. With the roofs, you know, having a light brushing of a lighter grey, that's helped as well. Right. Well, we're getting there. We're getting ready for the next stage. Right, I'll be back in a second and we'll close this one up. Right, well that finishes the outside preparation for this week. And now we get to the really interesting bit. Next week is when we start actually adding some of the bomb damage and the odd building and bits and bobs, really, just to finish it off. And a bit more weathering here and there, using the clay and the weathering powders and stuff. But that's for next week. Anyway, thanks for joining me. I hope you're enjoying this series and you're finding it useful. If you are, please consider giving me a thumbs up. And, you know, I welcome any comments. You know, it's always encouraging and nice to see comments and, you know, hear what you've got to ask or any suggestions you want to make. And if you are liking it and you haven't already, please consider, you know, subscribing and clicking that bell so you get notifications. Right, thanks very much, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.